The Aldis podcast is brought to you by Aldis International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our ServiceNow series, where we interview the best and brightest of the industry to share their story, advice, and views on the exciting world of ServiceNow and digital transformation.
Hello everybody, it's Mark Kelly. Hope you're doing really well. I'm the Chief Customer Officer and co-founder of Aldis, and part of our ServiceNow series within our Aldis podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking to Sebastian and Simon today. Sebastian is Managing Director at Protiviti, and his full name is Sebastian Mayer. And then we have Simon Grunewald, who's BDM at Protiviti as well. Paul, thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. The pleasure is on our side.
So with the podcast, what we love to do is start off with a little bit about your journey and how you came into the ServiceNow ecosystem. If I start with yourself, Sebastian, and then we come on to Simon, tell us how you came into the wonderful world of ServiceNow.
Sure. So my journey in the ServiceNow world started over a decade ago, actually in the SAP space. After several years of supporting clients, especially in the area of SAP security, I extended my focus and spent many years advising customers in the areas of information security, IT compliance, IT risk management, and IT audit. About 3 years ago, with my entry into the ServiceNow space, I decided to kind of marry the two worlds and to combine my software experience with my subject matter expertise in the areas of information security and IT risk management. For this purpose, obviously, ServiceNow provides a highly exciting tool suite that can be used to efficiently implement these complex topics in small, medium, and large enterprises. Meanwhile, I'm responsible for our ServiceNow delivery practice at Protiviti, Germany.
Thank you very much for that. And Simon, tell us about your journey.
So 5 years back, right, I would have never thought to make my way into tech sales or the software as a service industry in general, to be fair. But after finding myself a little bit stuck in a past situation and an upcoming referral for an entry-level SDR position at ServiceNow, I quickly realized I was part of something bigger. And from the very beginning, the vision the platform represents has caught me. So now being able to look at things from the consulting perspective and the implementation perspective as a BDM now really adds on to the experience I was able to gather when I was a seller at ServiceNow. So full picture now.
Yeah, that is great to have that perspective and having that very strong foundation, which is brilliant. And for people that don't necessarily know Protiviti, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you do it?
For sure. So I've just recently started at Protiviti, but still I've made a very fast entrance. So Protiviti not only is a ServiceNow elite partner, but also a global consulting firm, I think with now about globally over 9,000 employees, that strives combining together subject matter expertise in certain specified areas and technology capabilities for its clients. So really, as Sebastian mentioned, marrying the two worlds of ServiceNow and subject matter expertise really came easily, right? With years of experience in digital transformation, for example, in those kind of projects, and through having worked with a lot of highly regulated customer segments, for example, financial services and public are top of the list. Protiviti really stands out as a specialized consultancy and an emerging ServiceNow partner alike. So we do not only have the extensive knowledge of the platform's core functionalities, for example, and enterprise service management topics, but also bring particular strengths in the areas of risk management, security operations, audit, compliance, and controls management.
And these are really important areas within the platform, and particularly, people want to have this as a strong foundation. Tell us a little bit more about how does ServiceNow actually help with the IT compliance, particularly within highly regulated markets?
Yeah, Mark, that's a very good question, but also kind of a broad question. And I guess to being able to answer your question, we first have to clarify what IT compliance actually means, at least from our Protiviti point of view. So when talking about IT compliance, you could either put it that way, that one could make the claim that compliance could either mean that, for example, audits, either internal or external auditors, reveal that there are no findings with regards to adhering to regulatory or legal requirements. However, everyone who has dealt with auditors in the past probably know that it's almost impossible for an audit report to contain no findings at all. So, well, if it's not this option, then compliance could also mean that companies are in a state where nothing, and by that we mean no successful cyber attack, no failures in IT service delivery, and so on, can happen at all. Also quite unrealistic. I guess to reach this status, you would have to unplug the internet, and we don't usually make that recommendation, to be fair. So what is IT compliance then? So in our view, IT compliance is the ongoing consideration and implementation of regulatory and legal requirements. It's not uncommon for companies we deal with that they have a wide variety of requirements, which also means that we usually see a lot of redundancies within the different requirements a client has to fulfill. For example, if you look at a bank in Germany, from an IT perspective, they must at least implement the requirements of MA risk and BAT. BAT is basically the German supervisory requirements for IT in financial institutions. They have to comply with the GDPR from a data privacy perspective. And if they are of a certain size, they need to fulfill the requirements of the IT Security Act. If they deal with credit card data, then PCI DSS comes in play. And if we look even into the future, then we have regulations such as DORA and the EU AI Act becoming effective quite soon. So what we also quite see in the regulations are horrendous penalties. So if you take, for example, GDPR, there is the worst case penalty scenario, if I may put it that way, of 4% of a company's global revenue for violations or against the GDPR. And this is usually what we call the sword of Damocles that is hanging over companies, and especially over specific functions within a company. So the question to ask is, when are such penalties actually issued in full? And from our perspective, this is only the case when a company acts with gross negligence. But how can I, as a company, avoid gross negligence? What is my get out of jail free card? So from our perspective, companies have to look at IT compliance as a framework that regularly assesses the current status of IT against requirements coming out of regulations and laws that are changing quite frequently. So the question is, with a multitude of different legal and regulatory requirements, in order to remain manageable, the framework I'm talking about must be scalable. You must have a risk orientation. And from our perspective, what we hear from the market, most importantly, it needs to be free of redundancies.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, because you have to have a strong foundation, but you don't necessarily get to the destination. It's being on that journey, isn't it? And continuously evolving and knowing that the cheese is always moving, but you have to have a strong foundation and managing it very effectively along the way. Tell us a little bit more about how ServiceNow can help support this.
So thank you, Mark, for that brilliant segue. Speaking of foundations there, ServiceNow supports compliance with regulatory requirements or monitoring compliance by various means or functions. As a company, I first need to know what IT I actually have. This includes many IT processes, of course, but also my IT assets in particular. Accordingly, it is usually essential from a compliance perspective to have a CMDB as an essential basis or foundation, as you call it, or in some cases, it is even a regulatory requirement in itself to have a CMDB. For example, for banks or insurances in Germany. Let's stay with the bank operating in Germany. Here, there is the requirement to document the so-called information network, which is essentially based on a CMDB, or ideally would be. This must then be combined as effectively as possible with the functionalities of an integrated risk management system. This could be the integrated risk management module of ServiceNow. For example, this then can set up IT compliance assessments in such a way that an organization can perform risk-oriented checks against assets from the CMDB to determine whether regulatory requirements have been implemented appropriately or not. In doing so, I can not only use standard functionalities of the Now platform, such as workflows that we all know and love, but also ensure that people who have to answer questions about IT compliance are not asked the same questions over and over again. This can be supplemented with means of security operations modules from ServiceNow, with its functionalities, for example, to ensure operational cybersecurity by identifying vulnerabilities at an early stage and remediating them on a risk-driven basis. This gives a company the holistic opportunity to not only address regulatory requirements in terms of IT compliance, but also to raise their information security maturity level to, well, a whole new level.
When you look at that from a novice perspective, listening in, we've got some kind of example that kind of brings that to life, because we can all understand the importance of it, but let's kind of go down the weeds a little bit more.
Yeah. So I can speak to that. So we had a couple of times the situation where one of our FSI customers thought to implement ServiceNow as their central platform for various IT governance, information, or cybersecurity processes to especially address findings that came out of an so-called Section 44 KWG audit. And if you are now wondering what a Section 44 KWG audit is, this is basically a special audit right in Germany, which enables German regulators such as the German Federal Bank to audit and assess financial institutions with regards to compliance with regulatory requirements. A key challenge in almost all of the projects was the implementation or the fulfillment of the so-called information risk management, which is one of the key and major requirements stemming out of the BAIT. In order to being able to implement information risk management, the first step is to establish a so-called information domain or information network, which is basically a documentation of your business processes, even sub-processes, and linking them to the IT assets you are leveraging on in order to being able to lift the business processes. Therefore, as a first step in this project, we supported the clients in setting up in CMDB and enriching the data in the CMDB with information that is required from a regulatory compliance perspective, for example, such as business process, sub-process, and which business applications are being used within these processes. Secondly, IT assets then have to be assessed with regards to their protection goals. Protection goals from a German regulatory compliance perspective are subdivided into the areas of confidentiality, availability, integrity, and authenticity. And in the end, depending on the results of a protection goal analysis, you need to implement certain levels of controls to protect your IT assets. The BIT is unfortunately not quite particular when it comes to translating requirements into specific risk-oriented controls, which is why as Protiviti we have developed ready-to-use content which basically translate kind of unspecific requirements stemming from BIT or even other regulations into tangible controls as first step, and a second step into specific yes and no questions that can subsequently be used to assess your organization and your IT if the implementation of BIT requirements has been done appropriately or not. Of course, this content always needs to be adapted to clients, but our thought behind that is that it's usually better to start with an 80-90% solution instead of having a greenfield approach when it comes to regulatory compliance content.
Yeah.
So,
I was just going to say, by having that, Sebastian, you, even if it's not 100%, you're showing your intent into how you're going about it in the right way, rather than you're not actually going through the processes at all. So you can actually show to people that even though it's not quite there yet, you're on the journey to getting it there.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, which brings us back to what we've discussed earlier with the whole topic about cross-negligence and having a get out of jail free card. But our thoughts go even one step further, that we say from our perspective, it's possible to link controls or control questions not only to one regulation, but to several regulations, because the content of various regulation, I mean, if you, for example, compare BIT to GDPR, it always contains similar requirements. And I guess one of the pain points that we hear quite oftenly, especially from people that are assessed, is we are getting asked the same questions over and over again. Therefore, what we did, or what we do, is we link controls and control questions to several frameworks, which allows us, for example, to perform a BIT assessment in month 1. And if you want to perform a GDPR assessment in month 2, then we are leveraging the ServiceNow functionalities to see which are the requirements in the GDPR that we have already assessed in BIT, which are done not asked again, and which are the requirements which are, let's say, unique from a GDPR perspective, so that we ask in this second GDPR-oriented assessment only the GDPR delta. And this, of course, allows an organization to realize a lot of synergies, to avoid that business functions that are assessed or audited have to answer the same question over and over again. And I mean, I guess when describing our approach and what you need to do in order to be IT compliance, or to move towards IT compliance, I mean, as we've heard, that there's not the state of being IT compliant, then you get a feeling how complex the entire topic is, and that none of this that it would not be possible to implement such a complex framework if you would not have the broad functionalities in the ServiceNow platform that you could leverage on.
So much in there. We could do separate podcasts on each of the topics, right? To be fair, Sebastian, I think you've done a really good job of explaining it to the users and listeners listening in. Simon, being a step ahead of regulatory implications from there's so much involved, as Sebastian yourself have been kind of going through, how would you close out and offer advice to the listeners?
Thanks for the chance to close it out. I mean, as you mentioned, right, this specific topic with all its details could fill several podcasts. I tie it together like this. So looking at regulatory compliance usually is not even thinking about being a step ahead, but what we are trying to accomplish as Protiviti together with the ServiceNow platform, the workflows, is really getting our customers to that space, being ahead of regulatory implications, which usually can mean both a lot of complexity and untapped business value as well. And having seen how especially German regulated customers struggle to get from reactionary, manual, and mostly, well, let's face it, Excel-driven work to proactive regulatory excellence, I feel that Protiviti in combination with the powerful platform that ServiceNow provides is uniquely positioned to deliver exceptional customer experiences. Uniting years of experience with the technology to enable business to be at their best really brings life to rather dry topics on the Now platform that I've just recently started learning more about. And even though I have not been long with Protiviti, I've already witnessed a lot of astounding connection happening there in those two worlds, making for some very happy customers here.
You know, you say it's dry, and I can appreciate for people listening in, it's probably not the most exciting topics potentially within the platform and ServiceNow. Maybe employee engagement or HRSD might be more, but the reality is it's a very, very important topic for businesses to have ready, because if they don't have that strong foundation and protect themselves as a bit of a force field, the rest of the business is in doubt. So it becomes very, very important indeed. And I'm sure that we will revisit again. Thank you very much for your time. Sebastian Mayer, Managing Director of Protiviti, and we also had Simon Grunewald, who is BDM of Protiviti. Great to have you on the show today, and thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Mike, for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Aldis Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.aldis.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.